assuming we get through this and we get back our democracy from Dictator Donald, that is not the end. That is the beginning of a whole new process. We have learned through this experience that, for example, there's no enforcement mechanism for the emoluments clauses in the Constitution. We need to add enforcement mechanisms. We need to go through a whole series of things where we've discovered the Constitution is entirely dependent on goodwill and honor, neither of which are attributes of Donald Trump. We may have someone in the future like this, so we need to go through and do the very hard work of getting both chambers of Congress and 35 of the states to approve some amendments to the Constitution, and including fixing the very badly written 27th Amendment about succession should the president be disabled or otherwise unable to carry his duties. And we need to restore accountability that the Supreme Court gratuitously, without the question before it, brought up in 2023, which is a lot of what's empowering Trump to do the extra legal actions he's been doing. And one of these key things is before the Supreme Court momentarily, and that's, does the president have the power to fire people who are appointed to a fixed term at a government agency, commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and by party? All of that derives from this idea that John Yoo is most identified with. He's the very right-wing University of California, Berkeley law professor, that we have a unitary executive and all power is vested in the president, and that means Congress can't create institutions that in any way interfere with this power. Well, the way I've always looked at this, and I read Yu's writings when he started doing this some years ago, was, boy, if you wanted to set up a system designed to foster corruption, then you would favor a unitary executive. Having things like a 5-member commission with a majority 3 from the party in power and a minority 2 from the party that's out of power is a built-in mechanism to look for and alert people to corruption, incompetence, ideology that has no basis in terms of making the government work better. And that part of it has gotten about zero discussion in the public debate. And yet I think we're seeing it play out right now. And in line with that, we should remember that up until the Pendleton Act in the late 1800s, the U.S. government was entirely a patronage operation, and while it was very small back then, it was utterly incompetent in many areas and corrupt. Having professionals in a civil service, whether they're scientists, economists, historians, chemists, just managers, is one of the reasons that we are such a wealthy country today. And if we replace everybody at the whim of a president and we end up with people like Kristi Noem, Pete Hegseth, and others, Secretary of the Treasury Besant, who have no business being in these jobs, they're utterly unqualified for them, we will be worse off in the future economically as well as culturally and socially.
A common question and concern that I get from people who are in the chat on this show and just my everyday conversations is, well, what type of consequences are coming, if at all, for the people that you've just talked about? Now, you just talked about the need for an enforcement provision for the emoluments clause and the unitary executive theory. That all addresses going forward. So we don't necessarily have to deal with this again in the future. But I'm a cynical person. I don't think there are any consequences coming for members of this administration, regardless of the president. Do you agree with that?
No, I think that, for example, Pete Hegseth is almost certainly going to be prosecuted for murder or some closely related crime.
Really? You think so?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But not under this administration, clearly.
Okay.
But what he has done, and the officers who participated in this, rather than refusing an illegal order, which is what you are obligated to do, they should all be prosecuted, and I believe that they will be. It cannot be sitting well with the men and women in uniform that Hegseth and Trump are trying to blame the admiral, who's the head of special forces for the military, for what happened in attacking the disabled boat. Now, he may well be willing to take the blame for this. Excuse me. Excuse me. He may well be willing to take the blame for it because he supports the action. I don't know, because we haven't heard him testify under oath. But that's irrelevant to the fundamental larger point that once a craft that you think is an enemy craft is disabled, your duty is to go rescue people. I mean, the Nazis rescued American and British soldiers when their ships were taken out, put them on their submarines, ran them to where they were close enough to shore that they could get to back to land. This is a standard modern warfare practice and not at all being honored here by this administration. And in every position in the federal government, if you were an officer, you could be a civilian officer, you're a member of a commission. You take an oath only to the Constitution. Grunts and sailors promise to follow the orders of the president, but even so, they are obligated not to follow illegal orders. And so once we get it, I'm assuming we will get we know we're going to get a new House in a little over a year. The election will be in November next year, and on January 3rd of 2027, we will have a new House, and we're likely to have a substantial majority of people in the House who are Democrats. Now, Del and Bob just posted Trump's going to pardon all of these people. He may, and that will become a very important issue and suggest that we will need to put some limits on pardon power in the future. By the way, it used to be in the 1800s, for example, there were lots and lots of pardons handed out because the criminal justice system was worse than it is today. But we need to put some limits on pardon power, and where we can establish that there was a quid pro quo, and pretty clearly Donald Trump is selling pardons.
Clearly.
It's been easily shown that either the person or people connected with them have been directing millions of dollars to whatever fund Donald or his minions are directing. If those pardons are the result of a quid pro quo, then the legal issue would become, is that a valid pardon? And if Trump wants to claim that a pardon that was done with an auto pen is not valid, he won't get anywhere with that argument, but that's what he's been claiming. Then surely a pardon that was purchased is not a valid pardon. Even so, even if these folks manage to get off the hook because of Donald and Donald pardoning these people, that doesn't mean we can't have other consequences for their actions. It just means we can't prosecute them for those crimes. For example, we could turn them over to the International Criminal Court. We could turn Pete Hegseth over to the Venezuelans or the Colombians, both of whom are almost certain to indict him under their laws for killing their citizens who were just fishermen.
I would tend to agree with you if we had a functioning democracy. I just don't believe we have a functioning democracy. And the point has been made by some of the people who are watching this right now in the comments. We can assume that they're going to be pre-pardoned. And from there, I don't know if the subsequent administration will have the appetite, using the past as prologue in the world of the Merrick Garlands that we've seen, to actually push that issue, or would they instead say, let's just move forward as Americans?
So here's the danger in that, Mo Kelly. If we become cynical about this and say nothing's going to be done, people are not going to turn out to vote. People are not going to act to get reforms that we need to have. And we're not going to get to where we need to be. Now, I am of the, and I know it's a distinct minority view, that Gerald Ford did a good thing for the country when he pardoned Richard Nixon, because it allowed us to get past what had happened there and move forward. What didn't happen and should have happened back then, however, were some revisions to the law to address future issues like a president like Richard Nixon. And by the way, if folks haven't seen it, Andy Borowitz has a very, very funny letter written by Satan about, written by Richard Nixon, I'm sorry, from Satan's palace, from hell.
Freudian slip.
Yes, Freudian slip. But a very funny letter from written by an imagined Richard Nixon in hell. that I would encourage you to go find on the internet and read, because it's pretty good. But it's really important that we not be cynical and that we do not disengage. The thing that the folks behind Trump, because remember, Trump is not sui generis. He didn't come out of nowhere. You have the Koch brothers, you have John Yoo, you have these people at Heritage Foundation. You have a Republican Party that put up for governor of North Carolina a black man who said, I want to own some slaves. You have as of last Thursday night, you have a new national security document outlining the government's position, the administration's position about national security, that is a white supremacist, right makes white, we will align ourselves with dictators and against liberty and freedom. That stuff is not going to go away just because we get a different person in the White House. We have to have a huge reform movement. It's going to be a big fight. It's not going to be without risk, because people who, for example, want to make America a theocracy are going to try very hard to rewrite the First Amendment to, in essence, say we're a Christian nation and you must be a Christian or else, and you may not criticize the government unless the government gives you permission, and newspapers and other news organizations, you're going to be strictly liable. If there's a comma wrong in your article, then you can lose the entire company. They're going to try and do that. So it really matters that people are engaged and they're vigilant, and that they recognize Trump has shown us that we can no longer run our system based on integrity and honor.
I agree with everything you're saying, Professor David K. Johnston, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author, but I see what's happening right in front of me. And a lot of this was predicted if there was going to be a second Trump administration. Oh, yeah. And we went headlong into this. We can't necessarily control voters, but we can't claim ignorance. You talked about how this president is selling pardons. We know how former Congressman Henry Cuellar has been pardoned, a Democrat. And then the president said out loud for everyone to hear that, that Cuellar was not loyal or thankful or, gracious enough after receiving a pardon.
Cuellar announced that he's going to run apparently for office again as a Democrat. And Trump expects that a pardon comes with a quid pro quo, and which it should not, under any circumstances, come with a quid pro quo. And yes, Donald Trump is a man to whom loyalty is absolute, and it's a one-way street. You owe complete loyalty to Donald, and when he's rid of you or done with you, or you find you to be problematic, he will dump you in a moment. I will not be shocked if at some point Trump tells Pam Bondi to prosecute somebody who's been close to him because he needs to somehow distance himself from someone. But the most important thing to keep in mind here is, look at this in the perspective that we made a big mistake. A minority of Americans put this guy back in the White House. So lesson one from that, the Democrats didn't get the vote out. They came close. This is only a 1.5 percentage point difference. It's one of the closest elections in the history of the country. But they missed by 1.5 percentage points because they didn't get the vote out. Secondly, look at all the people now who are publicly saying, I got hornswoggled by Trump. One of the biggest leaders of the Somali community in Minnesota, most of the Somalis who live in the U.S. are in Minnesota, at least the largest concentration of them. And he was pro-Trump, and now he's completely against him. There are soybean and corn farmers now, left and right, who are saying, yeah, I voted for the guy, and that was a mistake, wasn't it? And people who recognize they made a mistake, we need to embrace them. Instead of saying, yeah, you were stupid, too bad for you, we need to say, thank goodness you came to see the light.
Does this mean that Trump is vulnerable from where you sit, or is that there are obstacles? Because I'm not sure that this adds up to him being vulnerable right now. Would you agree?
I think he's losing support very clearly. I think that if the Democrats are able to get a large majority, say 40 seats shifted to them in the next election, and if the Democrats take back control of the Senate, which remember is 50-50 right now, and the 2024 table is a better table to run for the Democrats than 2020 was, that it is entirely possible that Donald Trump will be impeached a third time and convicted this time, which takes 67
Wait. I'm not going to let you run by that. Convicted as in removed from office.
That's right. And it takes 67 votes. We got 57 votes the last time. So a handful of Republicans, including Mitt Romney, voted to remove Trump. He is doing such atrocious things to the economy, to our social stability, and his attacks on science. And let me repeat something I've said in the past on this show. More than half the economic growth in this country since 1948 is because of taxpayer investments in science. It is taxpayer investments in science, not private money, that gave you a computer in your pocket, that gave you tires that'll go 70 or 80,000 miles, and car engines that'll go 500,000 miles or more if you take care of them. All of that grew from taxpayer investments in science. So Trump is now radically attacking that. He's attacking medical science, materials science, biological science, which will be to our detriment. And many members in the Republican Party know this. There are lots of Democrats on the House who are saying, private conversations, the Republicans are saying to him, in essence, please rid us of this character. And so if there's a big shift and the Democrats really get the vote out in 2026, yeah, I think Donald is very vulnerable, and I think a lot of his support can be pulled away, including potentially enough that you can get 67 votes in the Senate to remove him from office.
Let me push back on that, and this is somewhat sincere of pushback. I would say that this is reminiscent of 2020, where we're talking about the moments leading up to January 6th in 2021, where you had a very unpopular President Trump. You had January 6th. You had the opportunity from Mitch McConnell and others to put an end to all things Trump, and he did not. How is it any different now when the Republican Party, by and large, has said, yeah, F morals, F ethics, whatever, we like power, and as long as this guy's in power, we as Republicans have power?
Yeah, I don't see it quite that way. What I see in the Republicans is not so much the love of power as a cowardice. Any Republican in office holder, especially on Capitol Hill, who speaks up against Trump is guaranteed to be primaried. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who comes from a district where she could have been reelected for forever if she just towed the line with Trump. Now that her wealth has gone in 6 years from $700,000 to more than $25 million, I wonder how that happened. She's not running for another term because she believes she might get voted out in a primary. You're seeing other Republicans announce they're not running again. And now I think it's atrocious that anybody would not be honest and uphold their oath to the Constitution because they're fear they'll be voted out, both on an embarrassment level that you were voted out and on a level of, I put in all this work and I don't want to be voted out. That's outrageous. But that's primaries, party primaries. In the general election, all the signs are pointing to Trump is in very deep trouble, and any Republican presidential nominee will be in trouble. I mean, there's a lot of mystery going on the right about J.D. Vance right now. Why is his wife not wearing her wedding ring? What's going on here? And there's lots of commentary among the, really deeply racist and openly racist folks on the right about, you can't put Vance in the White House. His wife isn't white. His wife is East Indian, a highly educated woman. And so I think we need to focus on is we need to get our democracy back, and we need to fix the parts of it that we find are not self-reinforcing of virtuous behavior and but are enabling of vicious behavior. At the end of the day, Mo Kelly, look, I'm an incurable optimist. Nobody in this world these days in America has 8 children as I did without being an optimist.
Before I let you go, David K. Johnston, I want to switch gears very quickly. I wanted to talk about this earlier in the show, and I didn't have an opportunity, but now you give me the opportunity. We know that the Trump administration is pledging some $12 billion to bail out farmers. In other words, the Trump administration created this problem. Now they want to quote unquote solve the problem. My question to you is, does that $12 billion earn him any good graces with soybean farmers, for example?
Well, it's going to save if he's able to get the money out to these people. And I don't believe he has the legal authority to do so. And I think it's pretty clear that the Supreme Court is going to say you don't have the power to impose tariffs except in very short-term, limited circumstances, because under our Constitution, only Congress has the power to tax, and a tariff is a tax. But assuming he's able to get the 12 or $13 billion out to soybean and a few corn farmers, it will get them through this winter. I don't know what they're going to do about next year. The Chinese are not going to suddenly go back to buying their corn and their soybeans mostly from us. They're getting them now from Brazil, a little bit from Argentina, and from Australia. They have apparently signed some multi-year contracts. I haven't seen anything supporting that except news reports to that effect. And we went from 13 million tons of soybeans to China to this year about 1. So we're a fraction, less than 10% of what was previously sold. I don't know where the market's going to be for these soybeans going forward. But there are going to be a lot of farmers who are going to lose their property. There are going to be a lot of cattle farmers. Cattle rearing is a 2-year cycle. And if you get in deep trouble early in that cycle, you may well not own the land that's been in your family for generations at the end of the day. So I think the question that political scientists in the field and journalists should be asking farmers is, are you going to vote for this man or someone like him again? And I haven't seen that question being asked. I noticed that NPR and David Brancaccio's American Public Media Business Marketplace show in the afternoon have talked to a lot of farmers, but I haven't heard any of them say, would you vote, if you could do it again today, would you vote for Donald Trump? That would be the telling circumstance. And if your answer is yes, which means I think I'm more concerned with racism and making America white again than my own economic well-being, well, you're an idiot. I don't know what else to say. You're a despicable idiot at that.
But that has been the linchpin of, I would say, the Southern strategy.
Yes.
And a lot of appeals to voters is like, well, at least you're not black, or at least we're doing policies and strategies which are hurting black and brown people. It doesn't matter that you don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out. At least we're hurting the people that you don't like. And that has been a successful strategy for decades.
It has been. And the problem with it now is that Trump's policies, well, clearly aimed at people who are not white and at least nominally Christian. I mean, if you look at the national security document, there is no question it is a white supremacist document, yes, through and through. The folks to whom this argument is appealing are not the complete set of people who don't like the fact that everybody in America is not European heritage. And a lot of them are going to look at their own finances, I think, and say, wait a minute, I'm getting clobbered in this. We haven't begun to see, but we will soon, reports about my husband had a stroke and he died because the 3 hospitals within an hour of us all closed because of Trump. And we took 2.5 hours. And by the time we got him to the hospital, he was gone. My little girl died because we can't afford her drugs anymore because of Trump taking away with the Republicans the tax credits. This will not be a pleasant road we are going to go down. But we should not lose heart, and we should stay focused on the prize. And the prize is to get a society that is more equal, more fair, more holding those in power to accountability. That won't just happen. It will only happen if large numbers of American people demand that it happen. That's how we got rid of slavery. That is how we, even though we replaced it with Jim Crow, that is how we got child labor laws. There were ministers back in the day who would say, those who propose these child labor laws are the agents of the devil, for it is God's plan that these children work in the factories. We got child labor laws. We got labor. We got unions made legal. Unions were criminal organizations when this country began. And we got a Republican president, Richard Nixon, to sign the two most important environmental laws in the history of the country. So we need to keep our eye focused on what we need to do. In the short term, we need to try and corral, block, minimize the damage from Donald Trump. And in the medium and long term, we need to focus on getting a Congress that is responsive to the people, which at some point is going to require a complete change in campaign finance. Probably, I mean, there's some reforms we can talk about in another show I've proposed that would do a lot to improve campaign finance and politicians feeling beholden to their donors, not to their voters. But the worst thing to do is to get cynical and say nothing's going to happen. It will only happen if we make it happen. That's what FDR said to the woman who said, "Mr. President, do X." And he said, "No, ma'am, that's not how it works. You have to make me do it.
Go and make me do it." Professor David K. Johnston. Can't wait to do it again. Have a great day, sir.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.